Lady in the forest with a vacuum. I want to say I was like 8, maybe 9. And I was playing in a small park with my brother. We were climbing a tree, and I, who was stupidly wearing rain boots, fell head first and got my leg caught between two branches. It twisted my knee pretty badly, bad enough where it still affects me a bit to this day. My brother lifted me out, and ran home to get my mom. He hadn't brought his phone. When he was gone, and I was sat alone crying in the forest. This is where it gets a bit weird. A lady appeared out of nowhere. She was black, and had kinda poofy black hair that was short, kind of hugged her head. She was carrying a vacuum in a purple box. When she saw me crying, she sat next to me and talked me down. She asked what happened, and I told her, along with telling her my brother had run to get our mom. Well, after about 5 minutes, my mom appears to grab me. The lady was gone. My mom has no recollection of seeing anybody with me. Neither does my brother. She is embedded into my memory, and I'd never met anyone that looked like her before, nor have I since. To the Satanists in the forest, let's not meet. Hello. I'm French, so I apologize in advance if I make any mistakes. As I just said, I live in France, and this story happened to me this summer, just after the lockdown ended. I was, and am still 19 at that time. After the lockdown ended, I went to my grandparents to spend a few weeks. I got tested before and no problems there. My grandparents lives in a small city in the north of France, and they have a dog who's quite a big dog. When I was really young, I lived at my grandparents for a year, and at that time the dog was only a puppy. Her name is Chippy, in French, which kinda means little devil in English, but in an affectionate way. Considering when I was living there I played with her a lot, we are both really close, and that will have its importance later. Two of my hobbies are having long walks and running, thus every evening I was going out for a long walk with the dog. There's a track that follows a path through the forest, then there's a small hill, and on top of that a big place with lots of fields there. I run there a lot, so I know the place. The air is fresh and the view is quite beautiful. So I was going there with the dog every day. It was also helping my grandparents to have her doing lots of exercise. The first time we went there nothing special happened, we just enjoyed our walk. It's about 6 to 7 kilometers, so basically an hour walk. The next day, when we arrived on the top of the hill, in the field, it was probably around 10 p.m. but there was still some light because it's summer. There was 3 other persons walking in the fields. They were younger than me, probably about 15 to 16. I also noticed they were smoking, so my guess was that they used to come here so they couldn't be seen by their parents. We went past them. I greeted them and they greeted back. Once again, nothing special there. For a whole week I did this walk around the same time, 10 p.m., and passed by those 3 guys with nothing special happening, and it was perfectly fine to me this way. The second week, as usually, I went for the walk with the dog Chippy, and arrived at the fields. There was only one of those 3 boys. He wasn't smoking this time though. When he saw me, I was at the entrance of the field just after the little hill climb, so the entrance of the forest was just behind me. He did a sign with his hand to catch my attention and asked if I had a lighter, which I actually had in my pocket. I told him, yeah sure, so he walked to me, the hand in the pockets of his hoodie. When he came near, for some reasons I felt a shiver. It's crazy how sometimes your instinct knows there's a problem but you don't listen to it because nothing looks weird to you. I handed over the lighter when he passed by. At that moment, my dog was staring at him. Then everything happened really fast. He did a really fast movement with his hand coming from the hoodie, and I only saw something shining. I just had a reflex of throwing myself back, so hard that I fell down, and I just realized that it was a knife he was holding and he just tried to stab me. What saved me is my dog, God bless her. When she saw the guy trying to stab me, she jumped on him and he fell down. As I said before, it's really a big dog. I immediately got up on my feet, and heard something in my back. From the entrance of the forest I saw 2 guys wearing animal masks running to me. They were probably the 2 friends. In this moment your brain acts for yourself. You don't think at all, and in this case the answer he found was really simple. The other guy was still on the ground. I just watched my dog and told her run. I started running and she followed me. But I heard the worst possible thing from the guy who got up. As well, catch him. Don't let him go. At this moment I was totally terrified. I was just running. I was hearing them running behind me. I was only thinking, how long will they follow me? Who the hell are they? This was the first time I was really happy to be a runner. I was clearly better than those guys, and that totally saved me, because they chased for something that felt like an eternity to me. Fortunately, at the end of the field, there's another entrance to the forest, and this time, it's a descent with the road at the end. I heard the steps of the 3 guys vanishing as I arrived at the end of the forest, though I didn't stop running until I arrived at my grandparents' house and locked myself I caught a big breath, and gave a huge hug to my dog. I saw in her eyes that she totally understood what happened, and I had never been so happy to have her in my life. After that, I told everything to my grandparents. We called the police, but they didn't find anyone. I don't know what these guys wanted, but the animal Max really made me think about some kind of statists. I really don't want to know anyway. I still do long walks with Chippy the hero dog, but I now go earlier into places with a little more people. I hope you enjoyed my story. I apologize again if I made any mistakes, and to the 3 guys in the forest, let's not ever meet again. Weird experience inside a forest. So, today is Sunday, a day I usually go out to hike, a route I hiked many times. I don't anymore. But I had to think of it today. This experience is roughly 2.5 years old now, and I haven't gone back to my old routine since then. I live in a pretty small rural village in Germany. Less than 200 people live here, not much around here besides fields, forests, cows, sheep, a donkey, and 2 horses. Directly outside of the house I live in, is a road to the right which leads into a field and then into a pretty thick forest. The route I usually take is around 18 kilometers long, or 11 miles for the US readers. I will simply stick to miles, to keep it simple. It doesn't sound like much, but the route is very rough. It's uphill almost the entire time, and the forest has no roads, so you actually walk through rough terrain with thick tree roots and bushes, etc. Anyway, I walk this exact route 1 to 2 times per week, and usually when it's already dark outside. I wear a headlamp for when it's too cloudy out and the moon isn't nicely visible, so I don't trip or get hurt. Why at evening/night? Because I'm usually on the phone with a good friend talking. We live very far apart. It's day for her when it's night for me. I don't mind, because that way, I don't feel alone hiking. Info dump, because I deem it important. For people who are not familiar with German forests, the most dangerous thing you may encounter is a wild boar, so it's usually pretty safe to just wander around. Almost no wolves where I am, and even if, they would be way too shy to just show themselves. Bears are not a thing here, also no crazy people living inside the forest. The only thing you encounter is the farmer who drives up like 1 to 2 miles into the road to check on his livestock. After that it's all forests. No fields anymore anyway. Now to the weird thing I experienced. Headlamp on, AirPods in, talking to my friend, catching up. For the first 5 miles or so, nothing weird happened. I even had the headlamp off, though I wore it on my head. The moon was making enough light, and once your eyes adjust to the dark, you can see quite well, as long as you don't sprint around the forest. Though once I was in the deeper part of the forest, my AirPods started making weird sounds, almost like I was losing connection, but I could hear a voice still. It was more like a background buzzing. It wasn't actually interfering with my call. This buzzing went on, and after 20 minutes or so, I suddenly noticed that I couldn't see as well anymore as I could. The moon was blocked by clouds, but these clouds didn't look like normal clouds. They looked like thick walls of fog, just way higher up than fog should be. I know it's hard to picture, but clouds usually look fluffy or thinned out. These seemed heavy and wet. It's hard to describe. I told my friend to hold on for a minute, because I had to focus on something. Why I said that, but focusing on her talk was disrupting my view for whatever reason. LOL. Sensory overload, I guess. The thing I had to focus on was a huge, thick, deep black cloud. It kinda pushed itself through the fog like clouds and positioned itself right over me, almost as if it was trying to throw a shadow around an area I was in. The cloud also started to swirl in the middle slightly, and that was when my connection just fell flat. I got the beeping sounds you get when you lose connection, and gone was my phone call. No more bars, no mobile data. Nothing. But my AirPods were still buzzing like crazy in my ears. That's when I felt uneasy, neck hair standing up, cold sweats on my back, and I started turning around to leave, because the way ahead just seemed a lot more dark and sinister than my way back. The moment I turned around and started, slightly jogging back because I felt scared, was when I started to hear bell sounds. Almost like church bells, but the sound was deeper. That typical ring you hear after a bell sound was just stuck in the air, and it was giving me this weird sensation as if my bones were suddenly rubbing against each other. It was extremely freaky. All I remember is that I started to go from walking back to jogging back to running back, trying to leave the forest and go back to the fields where you start. I didn't look back while running, but I could hear the bell sound getting weaker the further away I got, and the fog-like clouds were becoming less and less until I finally left the forest and I was back to a normal sky, thin clouds, and the moon. Once I got back home, I simply undressed, went into the shower and went to bed. Thinking I just simply got spooked today, or maybe I was exhausted and my brain went haywire. I don't know. But I never saw a cloud like that in my life, and church bells are not a thing late at night inside a forest. Never went back to hike that route. Never told anyone, because I'm a bit embarrassed. But I had to think of it today. Our bizarre experiences with the forest behind our house eventually forced us to move out. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion, my mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it, and when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing scary about it. But she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone was walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark. And even during the day, we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something wrong with it. Like it wasn't quite standing on the ground, and it was a little too tall to be a person, and it was sort of distorted. And she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring through her window. And when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks, and stopped bothering even opening the door, until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside. But when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open, and would run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage, because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking, I guess thinking it'd look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something, and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening my dad was in the backyard, and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it despite the fact I'd seen my mom inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mom was calling to me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dogs started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard, and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence, and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night my mom didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking. And he woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest, with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk he asked me if I think the door being opened that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all get exorcised just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little, I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there, in the forest behind our house at night. But I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. Something ripped an animal to shreds. Hello, my name's Cal. This is my first time posting here. TW, mentions of an animal being torn apart. I don't describe it, just the aftermath, and mentions of blood. I'm not really sure if this would be considered a paranormal story per se, but nothing else really makes sense. Let me explain. My family would go camping every chance we got. The place we'd always go had no natural predators, at least, nothing bigger than a fox. My dad specifically chose this spot so us kids, me and my 2 siblings, could frolic through the woods without having to worry. This particular trip was during the May long weekend. There was still a considerable amount of snow, so my dad brought our ATVs and some sleds for us. It was the day after we had arrived, and my dad wanted to go on a little trip down the road we came up. I asked if I could come, and he said sure. We both hopped on his quad and set out on our little trip. I forgot to mention earlier that we had deer around the area. Nothing crazy, but the odd one would wander through our campsite. You could tell they had no natural predators, since they didn't run away when there was a human around. My siblings and I would always manage to get pretty close to one, before my parents yelled at us to stay away. That is, anyway, my dad and I were a few miles from the campsite when we rounded a corner, and came across one of the most gruesome sights I have ever seen in my life. On the side of the road were the pieces of a deer, at least, I think it was one. There was blood absolutely everywhere. Worse still, there was steam coming from the remains, which meant this was a recent kill. My dad is usually a pretty calm guy, not much can rattle him. But I could tell that this freaked him the hell out. He was in the process of turning us around when this, I don't know, screech came from the forest. It was so loud, we both flinched. I remember searching the forest for the source, but my dad was in the process of hauling us down the way we came. It could have been a trick of the light, or because I was freaked out and maybe I was seeing things. But I could have sworn I saw something running alongside us. But only for a second or two. I know I sound absolutely crazy, but the thing looked like a large dog before it vanished into the trees. My dad raced back to camp and we were all packed up and headed to a different location by the end of the day. We never did go back to the campsite after this encounter. I did ask my dad about it a couple years ago. He just said it was because the new campsite was better than the old, better trails and whatnot. I think he's full of crap. I think whatever we encountered that day scared the hell out of him. And I think that whatever I saw, he did too. But I, for one, am thankful we never went back. I'm not sure if I would be able to sleep at night after what I saw. It still haunts me till this day. Creepy Christmas encounter in the forest. First post here. This just happened about 1 hour ago, so my memory is fresh. First off, I am living very rural, in a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses, but close to the highway. You can drive there within maybe 5 minutes, and also about 10 minutes away from the town. If you cross the street, it just takes you about 10-minute walk to reach the forest. First Christmas Day. In the afternoon, my partner and I decided to go for a little digestive walk, as we were really stuffed from all the food. It was about 1700 hours and already dark when we left, and we had a big and bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road towards the forest and then turn right, following a small graveled cycle track close to the forest border, which connects our village and the next, maybe 15 to 20 minutes walk between villages. In the middle part of the track, you have to walk through a small bit of forest. It's rather dark and the trees are very high and quite dense. When we entered, I saw our flashlight reflecting on something and recognized a car being parked there on the side of the track, close to the trees. This struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive there and the path is very narrow and hidden, so I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside of the car and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen. So it must have been parking there for a while. A bit in front of the car I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it, so I could focus better and photograph it with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner told me, there is someone standing behind us in the middle of the road, he is looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally, because at this time in the evening and close to the border of the forest there are boars sometimes, and it's mating season. So they are more aggressive than usual. Indeed there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's reach. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing us. At first, I thought he might be startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone's just taking photos around your car. It was not even legal to drive on that path with the car. I decided to get up and confront him from a distance, explaining to him that I was just taking photos of that tree. He didn't react and still just stood there. I then went on to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that this wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure about there being a normal explanation for his behavior. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to just GTFO and follow the path leading to the next village. It was maybe 5 to 7 minutes until we reached it. I remembered the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though, unfortunately, and Googled it, and it turned out that he was from a city about 6h away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is in a very strict lockdown right now, so you are only allowed to travel, even by car, if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around, and going back inside. I was able to see that he parked there again and turned the lights off. He didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then, but I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all the details. Big regret that I didn't memorize the whole license plate, but it was just so surprising that I seriously didn't think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as really strange when I thought about the frozen windows and that he could possibly have walked behind us, plus him having no light and not responding. He did seem to be sneaking up on us when I sat down to take the photo. I think I was very lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I was alone, so, creepy guy sneaking around in the forest, let's not meet. Edit. When I told my housemate, she theorized that he may have been spying on the houses very close to the forest border, as you can easily look into their backyards without being seen. You have to walk a bit up the hill and further. About 5 minutes. I think it's likely. I had the thought of photographing the car when I entered the forest part of the path, but somehow I felt unwell about it and decided to not do it, despite it being an interesting scene. In hindsight, I believe this saved me, as he must have hidden behind the trees close to the car and forest entrance. If he was really planning a burglary, or worse dumping a body, I think it's not unlikely he may have attacked me if he realized I had a potential photo of his car with a recognizable license plate. Update. Went back and found a tape marking on one of the trees, a very small hideout, more to store things than to sit in, as well as some cut off part of a backpack.